righty, we are back, and we are live, talking rock with you as we do every day live, 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time, here on Volume SiriusXm Channel 106, Trunk Nation. Replays every night, 10 to midnight Eastern, anything you want, anytime you want on the SiriusXM app. So you can listen to in the live window, you can catch the nightly re-air, and if you miss all that, you can always listen anytime you want. Interviews, full shows, audio, video, and more on the SiriusXM app. Kicking off the week here on a Monday, great guest to lead off the week, and we haven't spoken to her in a little bit. I think the last time we spoke to her was on Zoom with Amy Lee because they were getting ready to go out on tour, Evanescence and HALESTORM, and I remember Lzzy Hale was in her car outside of the studio where she was making the record that we now have called Back from the Dead, and she now joins us live. Lizzy, how are you?
I'm doing great, Eddie. How you doing? Thanks so much for having me.
Anytime. It's always good to talk to you. And I do recall you were out, I think you were outside the studio and you were on your phone and we were doing that Zoom thing with Amy and you were trying to get a good signal and you were in your car and you ran out from having worked on this record, if I recall.
Absolutely. You know, for as much technology as those studios have, the internet always sucks. So I had to escape and go somewhere else.
Well, tell Raskulinets to try paying the bill and maybe it'll work better.
You know what? I swear I told him that. I'm like, look, man, you got like a lot of musicians in here and we don't just record, we do a lot of other things too. He's like I can't. He couldn't figure out what the password was either in order to like do something. I'm like, okay, never mind. I'm going out in the car.
It figures like this mad professor, wonderful producer has no clue how to work the internet. That just makes all the sense in the world, I think.
Well, that's the beauty of it, though, is that his heart and his soul is purely in the music. He doesn't have time for that stuff, you know? It's like
exactly.
it's all emotion, all energy right now, all the time. You know, Nick. So it's always a wonderful experience.
Yeah, no doubt. So tell me about the experience in making this record. 4 years since the last record, Vicious, which I absolutely loved. I've been listening to this record, also totally kick-ass, totally loving it. But a lot went on in 4 years, and I imagine you didn't anticipate it being 4 years between records. So whether it be COVID or everything else, talk about what went on with the band and the challenges, if there were any, in making this record.
Well, you know, we definitely didn't expect the world to all of a sudden come to a screeching halt. We had begun writing this record shortly after we ended our album cycle. We were all in actually my basement here in Nashville and jamming out to some tunes and doing some demos. And then we just got, you know, then all of a sudden the bad news started. And we're like, geez, guys, I think we need to like separate for a while. Everybody just, you know, we'll stop, we'll lock down, and this thing will blow over in a month, right? Not. And so, you know, we went through like all of the phases of lockdown, where first it's like, it's vacation. Let's just, you know, have beer delivered to our door and it'll be great. And then slowly but surely as time went on, you know, I don't think I realized truly the gravity of how much I use all of these things via, you know, be it touring or just the forward movement of it all, the mission of it all. Always having kind of something on the schedule. I've you know this. I've been in this band since I was 13, so I have used every aspect of this band to combat a lot of, you know, my personal issues, a lot of, you know, I use it to balance out my mental health. So I went into kind of a dark place over the next, you know, year or so, to the point where I'm like, I don't know, like, are we ever going to do this again? Are we even going to get in the studio? Do I even like music anymore? Like I couldn't like look at a guitar without being sad, and kind of finally had to really just kick myself in the butt and just be like, okay, what can you do? You can sit down and you can write yourself through it. Yeah. Just like you did when you were, you know, 16 in your dad's garage, you know? So I ended up doing that, and I hated nearly everything, all of those first demos that I created. But eventually ended up just using that as really the only tool in my arsenal to really just kind of get through the time. And those demos that I ended up kind of stumbling in, the pieces, the puzzle that I was creating ended up being the album. So it's really interesting how now I listen to the record, and for me, it's a very personal record, and if it sounds a little angsty, it's just because, that's the only place that I could put it. But it's not like I could throw it on a stage somewhere. So, but it's funny how now that it's out, it's become, now, I don't know, it just seems like almost very universal. And so to me, it just means that I was not alone in any of those feelings. We were all going through them. So it's such a relief to get it out.
Yeah, it's interesting when I listen to it lyrically. I mean, you open with Back from the Dead, which is just this whole great heavy opening, rally cry, back and all that. But there's definitely and I get it, there's definitely a darkness to the record, whether it's Wicked Ways, just reading the title, Wicked Ways, Strange Girl, even Bright Side is actually misleading because there's a negative connotation to the lyric on here. So and I've known you for a long time, and you're one of the nicest, most pleasant people I know, and I'm like, damn, Lizzy's really channeling some dark side on this. But is that coming from the experience of making it, or just where you were at in your life at the time? Or because there's also uplifting stuff on it too, but was a lot of that the cloud of COVID coming through?
I think it was the cloud of COVID. There was always that was looming. But also it's just, it's life, man. Our world is crazy right now. And when you're sitting at home feeling like you're just kind of helpless as to what do you do about it. The only thing that I could do is really write about it to get through it. And it's funny how I almost through this experience, and again, looking on the bright side, yeah, you're right. That's ironically probably one of the darkest songs on the record.
Right. It's funny when you read the title, you're like, oh, well, there's one. And then you listen to it, you're like, not so much.
No, not so much. Exactly. But I think through the experience, I'm almost grateful for it, because I rediscovered the why I write, and the why I enjoy writing is because I still do, just like I did when I was a teenager, use it as a form of my therapy and a way to do something about either the problems of the world or the problems that I have. It's just it's a way to be productive, and maybe even just feel like at least you're moving forward in some direction. And as you finish each song, and as you finish it and you demo it, or you go in the studio, you get it done, and you listen back to it, all of a sudden you can kind of put those things aside and be like, all right, I accomplished that. I did something. I'm putting something out in the world that maybe will help somebody. So it's the tool I got, and I'm going to use it.
A few other things on the record. So looking, and this is why I love getting music physically, and I've got the CD, which I'm holding in my hand, which I love, and the packaging and all of that. But the thing is that I noticed is in the songwriting, almost every song is credited to you and somebody with the last name Stevens. Who did you co-write with?
Yes. I co-wrote with Scott Stevens, who he ended up being a co-producer on the album. As well. When I was putting together my demos, my first trip out of the house was to see Scott, because, again, I was kind of in a state of look, I have all these songs and I want to put them down. I can't really get with the band right now, but let's finish these up so that at some point in time when we get into the studio together, we can actually have these things together. So I went over to Scott's studio, and we did this in a weird way. So I recorded all of the keeper vocals with him at his studio to the demos. And then when we got into the studio, we built up the tracks to my keeper vocals, which is the complete opposite of the way we've ever done it before. Usually I'm the last one in the booth, after the track is built. So it really definitely put a different energy to it. And Scott's amazing. He's my brother from another mother. He used to be in a band called the Exes. And we've known each other for, oh my gosh, probably about 12 years now, and we've written together before, and it's interesting because where I get stuck, he's got an idea. Where he gets stuck, I have an idea. So it's just it's a beautiful match, and he's just as obsessed, especially with the vocals, with producing vocals, as I am. So we were like mad scientists in his studio.
Well, and as far as the writing partnership working, do you both equally write music and lyrics, or the lyrics all your department? How did that shake out?
It's a little of both. There were times where I would come in with an idea that, like, okay, I just need to finish this up, and or it's fully fleshed, and then he's like, oh, like, I have an idea here, or he'll come to me, or he would text me ideas, and I would finish them at home. Either way, it depends on what the song needs and what makes the song exciting. And what I love about writing with Scott is that he doesn't settle unless there's goosebumps. So it was great for me because I knew I had somebody that wasn't going to let me just be like, okay, that's fine. And so with our forces combined, I love every song on this record, and we just took everything to 11.
Who wrote Psycho? Who came up with Psycho Crazy? Because that one scares me.
Well, I had a song called Psycho, and he ended up adding the crazy because he's like, it can't just be psycho. I'm like, all right, fine. It's a little redundant, but that's okay. And so ended up, kind of taking this piece into him, and then we just kind of put the puzzle pieces together, and then it's just so funny because I ended up telling him, because he hadn't seen me in a couple of years. We hadn't written together in many years, and where we left off, I wasn't necessarily doing any of those kind of crazy screams. It was like some high parts and stuff like that, and maybe some guttural stuff, but nothing like white noise. And so I'm like, Scott, check this out. I've been working on this for the past couple of years. He's like, oh my gosh, we have to put that in. So we ended up putting that in. And then we went back to Wicked Ways and ended up doing more screams on that, because now all of a sudden I had a new trick, in my arsenal. So yeah, it's just, the thing about songwriting is that you have to chase wherever the spark is, and whatever is new. You can't just, I don't like repeating myself, and I don't like just doing the same thing that we did in the last record, or the record before that. So yeah, it was fun to just kind of toy around with all of those things.
Speaking of the vocals, your voice is incredible. Everybody knows that. But I got to ask you a question, because I'm curious about this. Now, you're younger than most of the people who are guests on this show, because generally a lot of the people that I talk to are on the more towards the back end of their career and not more towards the front of it. You're 5 albums into your career now. You're still young. A lot of singers I talk to, when I talk to them about records, so say if I'm talking to Lzzy Hale 30 years from now, God willing, I'm still here. God willing, you're still kicking ass. But say I'm talking to Lzzy Hale 30 years from now, and I'm talking about the Back from the Dead record. I would say to you something like, man, when you recorded those vocals, did you feel like you were painting yourself into a corner that you still have to sing them now in 2050? Do you ever think about that? Because I've had those conversations with so many singers who are in their 60s or 70s, and they're like, oh man, when I did that 40, 50 years ago, I didn't think I would still have to be singing it. Do you ever take that into account when you're cutting a vocal in the studio? Like, man, this is going to be really tough to do when I get older if I have to do it on stage.
I never think about it in the moment. It's only after the record comes out, and I'm like, oh God, all right. Not only am I going to have to do this every night for the next, many, many years, but like, yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, what's going to happen, like you said, 30 years from now? And honestly, I don't know. I mean, I've continued to train. Something for you and anybody listening that should know is that nothing I do hurts. I take my vocal balance very seriously. So hopefully, I gotta hope that in 30 years I'll at least have some semblance of where I'm at now. Now, at the same time, you can't guarantee that. And there's also, again, for anyone listening that's struggling to, I don't sound like I did when I was 20. I don't sound like I did when I was a teenager. It's like your voice changes. And so really for me, it's an honest and not a shameful thing if you have to pivot, or if you have to, let the audience sing some parts or whatever 30 years from now. That's fine by me. I just hope that I can continue to tour. You know, I saw, this was a couple years ago, I saw Joan Jett, Heart, and Cheap Trick at the Ascend Amphitheater here in Nashville. And it was so beautiful, like just this is like life goals for me, you know. And I remember, I think it was Robin Zander who had said at the end of the night, he's like, by the way, we're all in our 60s and 70s right now, and we're not using tracks, and we're all singing in the original key, every song in the original key, and everybody cheered, and I'm like, all right, that's life goals. So
yes.
I guess all I can say is I'm going to do the best I can.
Then that's all you can ask for as somebody who's such a big fan of vocals and somebody who's so adamantly against the epidemic of tracks in live music. I don't care if there's you got to tune down a little bit or if you have to figure some stuff out. I mean, I went to see the Black Crowes recently. Their backing singers were two women on mic stands standing in the corner, not a computer. And then Chris Robinson's still killing it. Just brilliant. I mean, brilliant. And you talk about somebody like Robin Zander. I mean, he's just a total freak. I mean, that guy's, it's crazy what he can still do. So yeah, I mean, as long as you're keeping it real and it's still respectful and still close to what you once did. I mean, look, 30 years from now, I'll be, God willing, 87. I don't think I'm still going to be alive to see it. But Lizzy, I hope you're still kicking ass.
Well, I believe you will be, man. You'll be right there side stage cheering me on. Maybe, bring me my cane. I don't know.
I hope so. You'll be bringing me my cane, but I hope so. I can only hope so. The other thing about this record that I think is really interesting, one other thing on the record, and you did this on Vicious as well. So it opens with just a Vicious open with Black Vultures, just slamming heavy track. Same with this record, Back from the Dead. And then you close this record with Raise Your Horns, much like you closed out the Vicious record with a very soft ballad as well, a beautiful song called The Silence. Do you like doing that? Do you like opening super heavy and then leaving with a more light touch?
I believe that I do. There's just something about the calmness of it and just letting the listener sit with their thoughts after it all ends. But it also depends on the content. I mean, my guitar player, Joe, and I went through, I'm not kidding, 38 different sequences for this album. And, you know, we started out as like, okay, how are we, like, if we were just going to run this as a set, how would we do it? And then I ended up kind of interjecting lyrically just kind of the arc of the story. And then we finally came up with this. And there was really, I mean, for me with Raise Your Horns, in my mind, as soon as it was written, it was kind of always going to be the closer. So, there's something about, for me, and maybe this is selfish of me, is that if I'm going to be screaming my head off in one song, I'm going to want to show you that other side on an album. Mainly because I think that if you're listening to this album for the first time and you've never heard any of our other records, never heard of HALESTORM before, I want you to see that vast array. But for me, Raise Your Horns, it's just it's an uplifting, song. It's soft. The lyrics are meaningful. And so I really wanted to kind of end with that kind of sum up of that story and just kind of leave everyone with a little bit of hope instead of wanting to punch a wall.
Yeah, and the single, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the current single from this record, Steeple, is it like number one at rock radio right now?
It's number one, and man, that's just crazy. Like we have Back from the Dead and Steeple have both been number ones, and I mean, it's incredible. Like you never look. There's always that thing in your mind after you release an album, after it's no longer yours, now it's out in the world, it's theirs. That like, man, did we do the right thing? Is anybody going to like any of this? And so we're just so happy that it's getting the chance that it deserves.
And I imagine Steeple works great. I haven't seen you play it live yet, but I mean, just the whole spirit of that song and the connection with the audience must be huge. I imagine that goes over big.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Before it even became a single, when we were out with with Evanescence on that tour, there were so many people that were sending me pictures of the lyrics tattooed on their arms and their. It's like, I mean, it's just amazing. I'm like, Jesus, the song isn't even out yet, really. I mean, it's incredible. So you know, it's just so good to know that the things that personally that I was passionate about, that people are connecting with, and that, like I said, it's no longer mine, it's theirs. And so it's a beautiful thing to see people take ownership of these silly songs that you create, you know. And man, it does go over well live, man. It's just it's become a monster to the point that, like, we keep rotating all of these new songs in and out of our sets. As I've told you before, we switch up the set every night just to keep it fresh. And Steeple is one that we can't take off the set. People are upset. So it's really awesome.
No, I think that's one of the ones where you're going to be figuring out how to sing it 30 years from now and say, I got to still do this thing. That's there for life, I think, going forward, Lizzy, for sure.
Absolutely.
Hey,
and those are some high notes too. So we'll see in 30 years. Might have to drop that one down a bit. It's already in drop C sharp. So, or sorry, drop C. But yeah. As
long as there's no Pro Tools rig, and I'm like, Lizzy's lip syncing. As long as that's not the case, you're all good. Do it, whatever you got to do. I'm all good with that. So, hey, do you have like a few more minutes? Because I got to hit a quick break. I want to ask you about the tour and a couple other things.
Oh, absolutely. I'll be right here.
All right, cool. So we're going to put you on hold. We'll put Lizzy on hold. Quick break, and then we'll come back more with Lzzy Hale of HALESTORM. Again, the album is just another killer kick-ass rock record, Back from the Dead. It's out now. There's touring, a few other things to talk about. We'll get into with her right after this quick break.